Laboring Sons Memorial Garden serves as a link to the city of Frederick's African American and Civil War heritage. Located along Chapel Alley between East 5th and East 6th Street, it is one of the few remaining historic cemeteries in downtown Frederick. It is the only known 19th century burial ground for African Americans.
For many folks, it can be just a plot of grass that they see until somebody tells them the story of what happened there. So Laboring Sons, again for many years had been turned into a playground. After about a century of use, as a cemetery, it was a playground for decades. And it was after the effort to, clean the site up and also to add some interpretation about what happened there, that not only does it tell a story for our visitors that come here from other areas, but even for the local residents, people that may have lived in that neighborhood and didn't know the story of what had been there.
A group of enslaved and freed individuals organized the Laboring Sons Beneficial Society with the goal of establishing a cemetery of their own. In 1851, the organization purchased the 1.17-acre lot from Ezra Huck for $265.
It started as an informal society in 1839. And that one was simply called Laboring Sons Society. 1862, Laboring Sons split. The organization came apart. Interesting that that's 1 year into the Civil War. But about 2/3 of the organization withdrew. This was a fraternal organization. So we're talking about these fraternal organizations that were set up, very common in the 1800s and the early 1900s, to help members who were in need, and with the Laboring Sons group, it was also to provide decent burial.
The mere fact that there was a piece of property here in Frederick owned by a black organization specifically for the burial of black people, I thought it was spoke well for Frederick, actually, for that period. At the time, All Saints Church had a burial ground on All Saints Street, and just outside the white part of the burial ground was a section devoted to black members of the congregation. And a few members of other white churches had space for black people, separate but adjacent to the white burial grounds, St. John's particularly. But it was not until the Laboring Sons organization started that there was a black-owned piece of ground where they could be buried.
The area along Chapel Alley between East 5th and East 6th was a community in transition. Previously used as farmland, it was being subdivided into smaller estates and urban streets.
There is a list of numbers on it. The numbers correspond to a list of names that's down below. And you will notice there's some numbers that's just numbers, no names. If you go and correspond the number where this is, let's say we have a burial up against the wall of the cemetery, up against the house. It says 15. You go in here and you look at number 15. It'll tell you who's supposed to be buried at that lot.
As far as I know, there are 7 that are clearly identified as United States colored troops, and there's one other who was identified in, I think, about 1890 as a veteran, and that would have to be the Civil War. So there are 6 or 7 that can be documented as far as I know.
It is fitting that the city's African American veterans be identified and recognized. W.H. Brown, George W. Johnson, Thomas Lenzel, Henry Lee, Nicholas Nicholas, William Powell, and George Williams. At least a third of Maryland's enslaved black men fought for the Union, so it is likely that other soldiers are buried at this historical memorial ground.
There is probably, besides Civil War veterans in there buried, there's probably veterans from the Spanish-American War buried in there as well. Because we had blacks in Frederick County fight in the Spanish-American.
Researchers have uncovered an additional 284 records of individuals not yet added to the roster of persons said to be interned at Laboring Sons Memorial Cemetery, according to researchers, historians, and concerned citizens David H. Wallace, Mary Berry, and many others who have participated in keeping the memory of their loved ones and families from being treated unfairly.
If you evaluate newspapers as sources, there obviously are always issues with them. Newspapers have always had particular, political events, political views, and as David said, not every dead person, black or white, always got an obituary, always got a death notice, always got a burial notice.
Since my research has established, I think to everyone's satisfaction now, that in addition to the 400 plus identified as buried in Laboring Sons Cemetery, there are about almost 150 who were buried in what was then also known as the Institution Cemetery or Burial Ground, who should be included or added to that list, bringing it to my way of thinking approximately 550 documented burials with names attached in the Laboring Sons / Institution Cemetery.
This is 1948, in September of 48, and it was a notice that appeared in the newspaper. And it says here that the Laboring Sons Cemetery will be maintained by the city as a public park and playground, as well as a cemetery to be known as the Laboring Sons Memorial Park.
During 1949, the cemetery for Frederick's African Americans was bulldozed to create a park.
They dug holes and dumped the tombstone, would dump a tombstone in the hole and then cover it over. And in doing so, they were digging up bones.
Unfortunately, there are certain segments of society that we tend to overlook or not consider the way that we should. This was a historically black cemetery. The people in office at the time, the people in power at the time, felt that there should be a park there, and they simply ignored the fact that there were bodies buried there.
That cemetery, well, it was a black cemetery, but when the city made it a park, it was a park for only white kids.
By the late 40s, I guess getting close to 1950, just wasn't able to keep the cemetery up anymore. I know there were still burials there into the 20th century, but by the middle of the century, I think it was just becoming overgrown. It's obviously a constant maintenance chore to keep up a cemetery. And so the stones were removed, and the neighborhood around there had requested the city, why not make it a playground, put some kind of memorial there to recognize the folks. And then that's the point that it hit for several decades, where it became a playground, but we weren't really memorializing the folks that were there.
Since those stones are buried, those 116 or whatever it was, they simply covered them over.
Those black folks who lived in Frederick will tell you that, and this is all in my lifetime, Frederick was very segregated.
I was aghast, absolutely floored that we would knowingly bulldoze over graves.
"50 years later, a concerned citizen, Martha Reynolds, wanted to rename the alley back to Laboring Sun. Martha Reynolds' request for the change led to seismic testing performed by Christopher Goodwin, president of Goodwin & Associates. Testing confirmed the existence of graves only feet beneath the playground's surface. The playground was then ordered for removal.
We brought it to the public's attention, and I was one of the people who helped get the public to start paying attention and switch it back over to a memorial, which is what it should have been.
It is our plan to remove every piece of equipment and every structure in that facility.
I was promised that the Laboring Sun Cemetery would be dedicated by October the 12th. I want to know where we are, because I'm tired of not getting this done. It's something that's very important to a lot of people, and it looks like we're vacillating on it.
There never should have been a park where children were playing over graves.
Mr. Angel introduced a request to transfer $60,000 from the CIP project for Riverside Center Park Development to a new project for Laboring Sons Park Development. Also, time is of the essence with the ordering of certain marble and other stone to be used in the Laboring Sons project in order to meet the completion date of January 15th, 2003, Martin Luther King's birthday holiday.
With the removal of the playground, Mayor Jim Grimes and the city alderman corrected the error and rededicated the cemetery as a memorial park with stone, graveled walkways, and brass plaques. It wasn't until the administration of Mayor Jennifer Daugherty that the cemetery was put back on the map as Laboring Sons Memorial Park.
Even though it's not an active cemetery, it's still a cemetery. And it should be dealt with as respectful in the way any other cemetery is dealt with today.
The City of Frederick has owned and operated the site since 1950 and recognizes the historic and cultural significance of the site. In 2012, the city obtained an African American Heritage Preservation Grant to help further assist with the care and improvements to the site. Presently, the grassy lawn features a simple network of gravel walkways anchored by a monument that reflects the historic importance of the site. Memorialized in bronze and stone, however, the monument only reflects a portion of the people believed to have been buried on the site.
Well, being a city park, I think, puts it in good hands, and I know the city has explored. The state, for instance, has a grant program for African American sites, and I know they've pursued some of those funds. So, as I said, I'm pretty pleased with the park the way it stands now. I think there are plans to do more with it. In terms of the interpretation, you know, that becomes a tricky balancing act just because of human nature. So there are a lot more stories you could tell, but there's a whole sort of mental exercise people go through of reward versus effort.
Since there's so few, there's no reason why they couldn't be listed by name. And you know, an annual ceremony on Decoration Day.
If you go down to Washington and you see all the names on the wall, that creates a feeling inside of you that there's no way to compare what you feel when you go there and see that many people. And I think that even though that's not a cemetery, it still pulls that out of you. And I think that if we just get the word out, if they view it as a cemetery, not a park, that this is a cemetery that deserves the same respect that any other cemetery in the county deserves. And I think that African American history is not only important, we played a major role in making this country what it is, and if we are able to bring to light the importance of that, then we all are going to be able to live in a world that's much better, because we're going to want to make it better for those people who went before us. That's sort of the rolling stone that makes us who we are.
The City of Frederick would like to thank the African American Resources Cultural Heritage Society of Frederick County for its commitment to preserving and sharing the history and heritage of the African American culture.
It was during the very early years of ARCH. ARCH started, I think, African American Resources, Culture, and Heritage. We've used this terminology, ARCH, but it's African American Resources, Culture, and Heritage Society started. I think was May of 2000. Was the first meeting, and it was sometime after that time.
Basically, back around the time when they discovered laboring sons, then is what you're saying.
Right, and they were the government, I guess, the city government or whoever named streets were looking for renaming some of the streets and naming some of the alleys. And I think at that time we got a couple of alleys named after African Americans.
The dead remain with us, and we need to respect that, and I think we need to have society respect that.
It seems to me it might be possible to find some of those stones, and that would help create the cemetery look that is now absent.
If tombstones were visible, it may then obviously oh my gosh, that's a cemetery, who knew? And then may add a certain level of reverence. There's probably other issues involved with that as well, but you know, there always will be all sorts of issues, but that may add another kind of more sacred view of it all as compared to just being, you know, a big grass yard.
Lots of people will be forgotten, black and white. We're just doing what we can to keep alive the memories of as many as possible.
If we wanted to go the way it had in the past, we would only hear about white history. We had to at least start talking about black history, and hopefully once we get that information out and how important that is, then we can start tying together that yes, it all is intermingled. We as a people haven't gotten to that point yet.
We need to try to move forward and make this the best that we can make it now.
Mr. Wallace has been using the Maryland Room for many, many years and actually has done volunteer work for us before I was even here, so going back more than 18 years. He also volunteers at the Historical Society of Frederick County and is on the Collections Management Board. Mary Mannix, I'm the Maryland Room Manager at the Seaboard Arts Public Library of Frederick County Public Libraries.
John Fiesler. I'm the Executive Director of the Tourism Council of Frederick County.
I'm Rick Smith. I'm a retired chemistry professor from McDaniel College, used to be Western Maryland College, taught there for 44 years.
Mary V. Harris. I am a charter member of Arch, and I worked as a teacher for 32 years.
My name is Larry Moore. I also go by L. Tilden Moore. That's the L. Tilden Moore part is on the books that I write.
Donna Kazenchak. I'm a resident of Frederick. I've been an alderwoman for 3.5 terms.
My name's David Key. I'm president of Arch